Cool. Hi, guys. Welcome to week 6 with Dan and Jaime. So this week we have Dan in the hot seat again, reviewing a paper by ACL Thompson, I believe it is. But
Correct.
let's hand it over to Dan. And so, Dan, which paper did you review this week?
Yes, so this is going back a couple of years now. Paper from early 2018, but it's from Atul Thompson and some of his colleagues at Aspertar, and also Chris Bleakley from the University of Ulster. So, as I say, it's original research, and the title is Marked Asymmetry in Vertical Force but Not Contact Times during running in ACL Reconstructed Athletes less than 9 months post-surgery, despite meeting functional criteria for return to sport. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but we got there.
Good. So, that's taken about 5 minutes. Cool. So who are the authors again? Just sorry, repeat that.
So yeah, Atul Thompson was the lead author, and then you've got Ina Einarsson, Clint Hansen, our friend Clint Hansen, Chris Bleakley, and Rod Whitley. So some good researchers on the paper, and I'm hoping that I can do it justice.
Cool. Perfect. And do you have a presentation, I believe, Dan?
I do. So what I'll do, mate, is I'll share my screen now.
Perfect.
2 seconds. So you should be able to see that there.
Yep, I see that. Cool.
Cool. So what I'll do then is I'll just go through the paper in line with the headings I've got on my main screen here. So we'll look at the objectives and rationale first, the methodology within the research, the results, discussions and applications, and then limitations and future considerations. Okay. So I'll jump straight in. So if we have a look at the objectives of the paper first, and I've taken this direct from the introduction, the aim of this study was to compare gait characteristics during moderate to fast speed running of ACLR patients who had met functional criteria for return to sport while controlling for time after ACLR surgery. So these were all primary ACLR patients, and I'll dive into a little bit more about the actual participants when we get to that stage of the review.
Cool.
In terms of the rationale behind the paper, and apologies for the wordiness of this, they basically set the scene by going over the reasons why return to sport criteria have been put in place, and that's ultimately to with the aim of, I should say, returning the athletes to the same level of participation as they were previously. Protect from re-injury and as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Research has indicated that re-injury can be reduced if return to sport is delayed more than 9 months. But also there's this concept of functional criteria and clearance or clinical discharge. So another research paper which was cited indicated that re-rupture, so re-ACL rupture, is 4 times more likely if certain criteria are not achieved before return to sport. And then there's this argument whether kind of the discharge should be time-based or criteria-based, or a combination of both. So that's setting the scene, really. In terms of the metrics and parameters that have been measured, kinematic, spatiotemporal, and kinetic parameters have all been measured during gait analysis. However, these have typically been at really early stage rehab at lower speeds, and we don't really know much about the magnitude or when limb asymmetries reduce for gait parameters such as maximum force or Fmax, or ground contact times at faster speeds. So the kind of rationale was finished off by indicating that symmetry index is often used as a criteria by practitioners, and the less than 10% difference is often cited. But the reality is there's no asymmetry data that's been published during moderate to high running speeds. So this was completely novel, and it was really interesting to see the outcomes.
All right, that's fascinating. So Well, I'm sure we'll get into the patient, the subject list, etc. as well, because that would be quite interesting in this methodology. Sorry.
Yep. So we'll head straight into that now. So in terms
Cool.
of the participants, all of the participants were professional or high-level recreational soccer players, and all of the ACLR group had passed criteria-based return to sport program. So this was an Aspetar-specific return to sport program. All subjects were between 5 and 10 months post ACLR and were tested upon passing the return to sport program. And we can dive a little bit more into the demographics of the participants here. So 32 in total, healthy athletes. There were 16 of them, and then the ACLR athletes were split into two groups, pre and post, or shorter than and greater than 9 months. And you can see that they were matched, and there was no significant differences for any of the demographic data. There were two different types of graphs, and they were indicated here, but it was a pretty even percentage between the two groups. So into the protocol, this was a treadmill-based protocol, and all participants, I should say, were instructed to warm up for 6 minutes at 12 kilometers per hour, and then run to a point at which they felt their gait was comfortable and deemed normal. There were 3 trials, and they were all conducted within a single assessment, and they were held at 12 kilometers per hour, 14 kilometers per hour, and 16 kilometers per hour. In terms of the assessment itself, a minimum of 6 steps were recorded for analysis, and the participants were instructed to wear their own running shoes. So in terms of the data collection and analysis, obviously the authors had to measure maximum force, and they were looking into ground contact times, and they used some insoles by Novell, so the PedRx insoles, and all of the data was analysed using the company software. So a little bit of insight into the insoles themselves. They're only 1.9 millimeters thick, and they sat on the inside of the shoes. Each insole has 99 sensors on board, and data was streamed at 100 hertz or 100 frames per second via Bluetooth. Fmax is, as I say, maximum force, and this has been it's being used as a proxy for vertical ground reaction force, and the correlations between the two measurements have been illustrated in previous research. So Fmax was measured and normalized for body weight, and ground contact time was also measured in milliseconds. In terms of the way the intralimb differences were calculated, that was uninjured minus injured in the ACLR patients, and left minus right in the healthy patients. And then the difference between the difference in Fmax and ground contact time were compared between groups for each speed. So there were 3 groups in total and 3 speeds, and then significance and effect sizes were reported. So it's quite comprehensive in terms of the analysis and the kind of the actual effect of the difference. So moving into the results of the paper, we have a table overview there and a figure of one speed in particular, but I'll report the main findings off the bat. So significant differences in Fmax were found with large to huge effect sizes at all running speeds in the ACLR group, who had less than 9 months recovery prior to the clearing the return to sport test, and that was against the other ACLR, so greater than or equal to 9 months, and the healthy population. The largest difference in Fmax was present between the ACLR groups, so the shorter than 9 months and the greater than or equal to 9 months, at 16 kilometers per hour, which was the highest speed. And there was a trend for greater asymmetries in Fmax at higher speeds in the ACLR less than 9 months group. And it was in fact the opposite trend in the other 2 groups. So the asymmetry actually decreased as the speed was increased. And in terms of the ground contact time differences, there were The only difference that was seen was at 16 kilometers in the group that had less than 9 months since reconstruction, and the healthy cohort at 16 kilometers per hour. And you can see the data in table 2 there. The figure underneath just indicates the data collected it represents the data, I should say, at the 16 kilometers per hour speed between the 2 ACLR groups. So just to indicate that 4 out of 5 in the greater than or equal to 9 months post ACLR group were within that kind of well-utilized range of plus or minus 10% asymmetry.
Fascinating.
So in terms of the discussion and applications, the authors highlighted that this was the first study to investigate kinetic symmetry at moderate to fast running speeds in an ACLR population. And as we can see from the data, there was a clear difference in intralimb maximum force output between the time groups, even though both had passed the return to sport criteria-based test that they use at Asymmetry. So that's interesting in itself. The difference in Fmax between ACLR groups may indicate the importance of time in allowing for full recovery, be that biological, neuromuscular, or functional. Previous research has shown similar findings, although those findings were in jumping and hopping based tasks, although there wasn't an effective time in those research. So regardless of how many months post surgery, the responses were the same. I should indicate here that the return to sport criteria is it is an Asymmetry test, and they do include a T running test. So it's not just jumping and hopping. There was a T test in there also. Moving on to the next point, previous research has indicated the differences in vertical ground reaction force that may remain long after ACLR. So there was a paper that was cited which showed that the differences in VGRF remained up to 5 years after post-surgery. So we ultimately need to know the clinical relevance of this, whether it actually leads to anything serious, re-injury, or long-term functional differences, maybe osteoarthritis. And this was a snapshot. This was a moment in time. So the authors highlight the need for re-injury follow-up, particularly in that ACLR group who passed the return to sport test after less than 9 months. No difference in ground contact measures may indicate that the stronger relevance is there for force measures, and that should be of consideration in future research. But also the authors indicated that although these running speeds were novel and they were the greatest running speeds that anybody has ever looked at, there is a need for research at even higher running speeds that are more kind of, let's say, relevant to the actual tasks that these athletes may be demanded to conduct when they're in a game-like situation, or training for that matter. So in terms of the limitations and future considerations, again, the first few of these are stated in the paper. So the authors are clear that the fact that the sample size was small, although they obviously reported on effect sizes, which is fantastic. This is population specific, so it's simply or only based at football, soccer athletes. So the results of this study can't necessarily be applied to other cohorts. There was no information on the asymmetries of the ACLR athletes pre-injury. So again, we have no idea where these athletes were coming from. And again, it indicates the need for longitudinal data, and maybe this kind of data is something that needs to be collected on athletes throughout their career, throughout the season. There was no kinematic data, obtained. So there's no insight as to whether anything else would have been significantly different between these groups or at the different speeds. And of course, greater speeds were suggested to be required in future research. And just a couple more on the end there, which are kind of my thoughts. we need to consider different types of technology. So are insoles the best means of measuring Fmax, or do we need to use instrumented treadmills, or can we use IMUs? They're all different technologies, and they'll all provide slightly different outcomes. But maybe that in terms of the quality of the data collection, the sampling frequencies, maybe we can improve that. But also the ability to collect data in the wild. This was ultimately conducted on a treadmill in straight lines. Future research may want to look at running outdoors on grass, or using different footwear, something more familiar to the athletes, what they would wear in the wild during training or match play, and also some curved running, change direction movements that are more representative of the tasks that they would conduct in training and match play.
All right, interesting. Dan, just one thought. I don't know if they mentioned it with regard. I know the technology was your thoughts, but did they mention the limitation was that it only collected at 100 hertz? Because that is fairly low. I know obviously with the limitation of insole, that must be quite difficult. But did they mention the frequency of it at all?
There was no mention of the technology in this paper, and it was possibly beyond the scope of the paper. The reliability and the validity of the insoles has been tested previously. So the authors do state that in their introduction. So from a scientific perspective, that the technology was deemed reliable and repeatable. Having said that, we know that there is research to show that you need a kind of minimum threshold of sampling to ensure you pick up on all of those peaks. So it does pose the question as to whether there would have been differences in ground contact times, or maybe even greater differences in Fmax had the sampling frequency been greater. But I guess that's just an avenue for future research.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Dan, I really enjoyed that. Fascinating research. And I think that concludes our week 6. So well done, Dan. We get in there slowly, week by week. And I think that's all from me. Dan, any final thoughts from you?
No, I obviously want to thank the authors. I hope I did a fairly decent job at reflecting the findings of the paper. As always, we will include the link to the full text in the comment section on the social media platforms that we post on. So I do highly encourage you to read the full text for the ultimate insight into this particular study.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend, and we will chat to everyone soon. Cheers.
Okay, cheers.